Representative, if you will, would you please come forth and lay out House Bill 838?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you recognized me.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. If I may give these to the clerk to hand out. Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair. Today we have the opportunity to join 17 other states and the federal government in strengthening laws to seek out and convict sexual predators. Today we have an opportunity to speak to victims of unspeakable trauma and tell them that a clock is not going to give attackers a pass card. And voting yes on House Bill 838 eliminates the statute of limitations on sexual assault of children. Under current law, a victim must press charges before their 28th birthday. Many would say that that seems quite long enough. But the reality is, when a child is sexually assaulted, especially boys, a good deal of the time it takes them a long time to have the emotional ability to confront it and to carry forth with filing charges. And with boys, when they become men, as a general rule, they really tend to not deal with it until after they're married, which takes them after their 28th birthday a good deal of the time. As an example, we have Tommy Burt here today that I believe is going to testify. Kenneth Ward, his attacker, sexually assaulted over 50 boys. Not one of those 50 boys, not one, came forth until after the statute of limitations had expired. A policy like we have in statute today suggests that if a crime happened a long time in the past, suggests that it never happened. I don't think this is acceptable to any one of us here in Texas. We currently have 3 crimes for which we have no statute of limitation, and that is murder and manslaughter, sexual assault with certain limitations on DNA evidence, and leaving the scene of an accident if that accident caused a death. We will hear more testimony. We have some resource witnesses here available to speak on exactly why victims may not come forward to press charges by their 28th birthday. But as I said just a moment ago, there's many reasons. One of the reasons is often that the abuser of a child may be someone in authority who can threaten them and who can intimidate them, and it may take many years, and does often take many years, for them to get out from under this intimidation. Also, the effect that sexual abuse has on a child often carries profound psychological damage that may affect the child's ability to discern if something bad has actually happened to them. In other words, if someone they trust molests them, sometimes they are convinced that it's okay, and only later do they realize that it is not. But regardless of the reason, we should not use the calendar and a stopwatch to determine if this sort of crime occurred. We should not allow pedophiles a free pass and endanger all children within the reach of that pedophile simply because a certain amount of time has passed since a certain crime has been committed. Now, let me advise you, the way my bill is written, it is not retroactive. Let me repeat that. This bill is not retroactive. There have been questions about whether or not that it could be retroactive. The answer to that is no. Again, let me make it clear, it is not retroactive. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2003 that a repeal of the statute of limitations laws cannot be retroactive, and this law would be no different. So if you turn 28 before September 1, 2005, then you would not be able to bring a case against your attacker. This should clear any doubts in anyone's mind that the intent of this bill is purely to protect children from future attackers and attacks from predators who have already shown exactly who they are, and to allow future victims the ability to seek justice. This bill is not about what has happened to victims that have already come forward. And it is not about allowing people who have never had their day in court to speak out now. This bill is about our children and our grandchildren, and giving law enforcement and prosecutors a valuable tool that they need to get these predators off the street. This is an urgent matter. The Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, TAASA, tell us in their statistics that more than 226 children in Texas are raped every year. That is one child every 2 minutes. This is an epidemic proportion and simply not acceptable. The most common victims of rape are females 18 years of age and younger. In the United States today, 1.8 million teens have already been the victims of serious sexual assault. Approximately 1/3 of all juvenile victims of sexual abuse cases are children younger than 6 years of age. So, Madam Chair and members, the clock is ticking, and an important tool to put these rapists away where they cannot harm our children is before you now. In the interest of time, I will pause and invite questions from the committee, and then reserve the right to close after all of the testimony has been heard. But as you listen today, please remind yourself of one inescapable truth, and that is just because a crime was committed a long time ago doesn't mean it's never happened. I thank you for your time, and I'll accept any questions, and as I said, reserve my right to close.
Representative Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of questions, Representative Riddle. You mentioned that it was mostly about boys, that boys were the ones that are more prone to being sexually assaulted.
No, sir. I said that. No, sir. I didn't say that boys are more prone to be sexually assaulted. I said that when children are sexually assaulted, that it is more common it is more common for all the children to not be able to deal with this until they are older, and usually after they're married. And this is especially true with boys, that they're not even able to talk about it or deal with it until after they are older and after they are married. And this would put them at an older age. That doesn't mean that's not the same that's true for girls, but for whatever reason, the boys tend to hold back on being able to deal with it until after they are established in their marriages, and then that's when they're able to deal with it, even if then.
What I'm trying to find out is that in our society, it always seems, and then I'm not in favor of the boys being the ones that are being labeled as, but in society, it seems that there are more men than women that are sexual assaulters. And I'm trying to find out if there's any statistics that show that women do that. I mean, there's just a few cases, like there's what was the name of that teacher somewhere in California, I believe, or up in the West Coast that was having an affair with her student, and actually that was an assault, went to prison for that and came back. And what I'm trying to find out is there any statistics where girls are also, or women,
where women are sexual predators or pedophiles?
Yeah.
We have some expert witnesses here. I'm not an authority on how many women might do this. From my understanding and my knowledge, the vast majority, sadly enough, the sexual predators do tend to be men.
Okay.
But that's a question we can ask one of the experts that is here. Yes, sir.
The other question, which would be that in your research for this bill, did you find out if the numbers or any statistics regarding people that are sexually assaulted become abusers themselves?
Yes, sir. We do have that information. There are witnesses here that can also address that.
Okay.
From what I'm told, and I will leave those numbers up to the expert witnesses, that the people who are the abusers today were they themselves abused. And this is another reason why I think this bill makes sense, because I think that you will hear from some of the witnesses that if a victim is able to come forward, then that victim is going to be able, and let me say this, I'm not crazy about the word victim. I'm using it today, but I don't like it, because the people that I have met that have been victims of these unspeakable crimes, and let me tell you, this is a tough bill for me to come up here with, and it wasn't one I was crazy about doing. It's hard. I'll tell you, it's gut-wrenching hard. I told some of them the other day, I said, I see you more as survivors, and they are. The ones that are going to be here testifying, and then the others. But to be able for them to come forward and identify, then that means they're going to be able to say, you know what, this happened. And that person that assaulted them and attacked them, likely as not, is still doing it. And that's going to give law enforcement, I believe, more tools. And we have some district attorneys that agree with that we have testimony from, that we will be hearing from today.
I'll reserve other questions for your, the expert witnesses in some of the areas.
Thank you.
I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Representative, we do have a number of affirmations for witnesses, so if you don't mind, let me just go ahead and call your witnesses and give you the right to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Chair calls Annette Dunton, who wishes to testify for the bill. Ms. Dunton had to leave, so we will show her for the bill. Stephanie Burt, who is for the bill, does not wish to testify. Mark Hill, who is, let me, once you speak back to me though, I'll need you to come to the mic and introduce yourself. So let me start with Ms. Stephanie Burt. If you will, Ms. Burt, just state your name, who you represent, your position on the bill, and that's all you need to do.
I am Stephanie Burt. I am for House Bill 838. I am Tommy's mother, retired, and I thank y'all.
Sure. Thank you. Mark Hill? Mr. Hill, too, if you will, state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
Okay. My name is Mark Hill, and I'm for the bill, HB 838. I'm a survivor of physical abuse by the priest. I represent SNAP. I'd like to take a moment to go ahead and share my story. Approximately 2 years ago in my restaurant, about 2 months after the Bishops' Conference here in the United States, they had 2 strikes and you're out policy came out. 2 strikes and you're going to be removed from the priesthood. About 2 months after that, my predator came into my restaurant. He came in, I had video surveillance cameras. He came in to see how I was doing. I immediately went into my office, told him I'd be out shortly. I came back out a few minutes later, sat with him for about a minute and a half. He asked me how I was doing. He asked me how my father was doing. He asked me how my brother was doing. He just wanted to know how I was doing. 32 years after he had sexually assaulted me over 100 times. He was still practicing priest here in the Austin Diocese. I immediately contacted an attorney, found out the statute of limitations had run out. It was impossible to pursue any criminal indictment. I immediately then put myself in a treatment facility for sexual abuse. The place is called the Meadows in Arizona, Wickenburg, Arizona. I spent 35 days in treatment. I was told it wasn't my fault. I was told I was just a child. I was told I was raped in my childhood. I was told my mind was hijacked. I was told the reason I'm 43 years of age, I've never been married, never had children, is because I didn't have any coping skills with life. I did not know how to be intimate. I did not know how to share my intimacy. Into me I see. I couldn't see how I could share love and pain and shame and anger and joy and passion with another human being. My whole way of life, from the age of 11 years of age to 13, was to be nice, be cordial, rescue. And as soon as I felt any sort of intimacy or any sort of love for somebody, to run the other way. I had chose to protect my mother at that young age. I was enmeshed with my family, especially my mother. We had priests at our house every Sunday. My brother was in the seminary to be a priest. My brother would come home every weekend, and this priest, along with other nuns, would be at the house with us. We would have large Sunday dinners, and approximately at least once or twice or 3 times a week, he would seek me out, tell me how much God loved me, and how important it was that he educated me and showed me what life and love was all about. He groomed me, and he destroyed my childhood. Fortunately, 2 years ago, when I went forward and came back, I was able to, at that point, from treatment, I was able at that point to get in touch with the bishop here in Austin, Texas. I was able to have this priest removed from the podium December 23rd of this year. I had a face-to-face confrontation with this priest at an oval, in an office, with the attorneys, with the counselor, with the psychiatrist. I was able to hold up pictures of my brother, who's no longer with me today. He was 4 years younger than I was. I was able to explain to him how he's destroyed the lives of many. And he will not be able to do it again from the pulpit. Unfortunately, he can still do it in the general population. There is nobody who's come forward that's under the age of 28. There are many that have come forward that are over the age of 28. I also was able to, on January 13th of this year, I was able to have my father and the bishop reunite. My father's 84 years old. My father has never missed church in his life except for the last 2 years. There's been a lot of healing thanks to the treatment that I've been in. I've actually been in 3 treatment centers in the last 2.5 years. Fortunately, I had the funds, I had the money to do that because my life had spiraled out of control emotionally. I want to thank the committee for hearing my story. I want you to remember, take this with you, that the most important thing to remember about House Bill 838 is that all of us victims of abuse, whether it be from clerical abuse or anyone who's been abused, we're living a life of hell. It has been hell. The inner child within myself, a little boy who carried this shame with him for 32 years, no longer has to carry that shame. I've given that shame back. I was able to do that on December 23rd of last year. I gave it to the pedophile. I gave it to my abuser. The healing's begun, but I got a lot of work to do. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm open to questions.
I just want to make a statement.
Sure.
Thank you for coming forward and giving your testimony. It's important that we hear people, and I'm sorry that you had to go 32 years through so much pain. You know, I can tell in your face that you have been hurt. So it takes a lot of courage to stand before us as you have, and so I thank you.
I have just a couple of questions. Had it been 32 years since you had seen that priest?
I had seen that priest on, no. It had been 32 years since the abuse. When he left our church, occasionally he would come back to our home just to stop by, just to say hi to my mother. Because there was an open door policy at our house.
Sure. When had you last seen him?
I think the last time I'd seen him when I was about 17 years old. And I was 42 when I saw him next.
How old?
42 when he came by my restaurant, 25 years.
So how did he know 25 years later where to find you?
Well, my family's name is Rapolo, and I'm in the pizza business here, restaurant business here in Austin, Texas. And there are other priests that were close to my mother as well. I'm under the assumption that I'm sure he knew I was in the pizza business because my mother's name was Rosalie Rapolo, my dad's name is Hill. I assume that he just, after the 2 strikes and you're out policy had come up with the church, that he had decided he was going to have to find out where my business was exactly, where I was located, and stop by. My managers told me the day that he had come by, I was actually in the office, and they knocked on the door. And when I opened the door, my manager said, this guy's been by about a dozen times in the last 2 weeks to see you. Been by almost every day. And he said he finally caught up with you. And I didn't know who it was, so I looked out. He was standing there, and he was just waving at me. So he had been by a dozen or so times over maybe 3 weeks or so. trying to seek me out just for the sake of wanting to ask me how I was doing. I make up. He was seeking me out to find out what I recalled, not knowing I'd already put myself in a 1-week treatment program about 6 months earlier than that.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Did you not go into any treatment until after you saw him?
I went into treatment about 6 months early, just for 1 week. I went to what's called Survivors. You deal with trauma. So I checked myself in to the Meadows about 6 months earlier for trauma, because I had seen David Causey, who is the founder of SNAP, who I represent SNAP here in Austin. I'd watched him on the Oprah show. I sat down to have lunch one afternoon, and Mr. Causey came on the show. And he told his story. He was about 38, and he talked about how his brother and he, after about 20 years or so, had started talking, and they realized they were both altar boys, and I was an altar boy. I was always his favorite altar boy. I was called out of the parochial school I went to do funerals regularly. Only one altar boy was ever used for funerals. I was used, and there were many times that occurred also. The abuse occurred.
So I'm trying to figure. So you had gone 25 years and hadn't had any kind of treatment or counseling or anything?
No, I had become compulsively sexual in my lifestyle. I had become someone who dated a lot, just dating constantly. I started acting out sexually with women, dating, going out and going on a date for dating someone for a month or for 2 or 3 months, and for 6 months, and then breaking it off. I couldn't have a committed relationship, so I was sort of just going from one relationship to another, and I did that from the time I was 17 till I was 43 years old.
So at that time, then, based on doing that, and is that what prompted you to go to counseling?
Now, what prompted me to go to counseling for the 35 days was I'd already been in treatment for 1 week. I'd come back, and 5 months later, right around Father's Day, is when they'd passed the 2 strikes and you're out. About a month after that is when the priest had come into my restaurant. There's another part here that I left out. When I was in the restaurant, I closed the door after he had waved at me. My phone rang, and I looked at it and said, "Unidentifiable caller." And I answered it, and I said, "It's Mark." I said, "Hi, Mark. It's Jean Collins from the Meadows. How you doing today?" Ms. Collins was the intake lady, the counselor at the Meadows, where I'd spent 1 week 6 months earlier. So at the same time, I was secluded myself in my office, trying to decide what I was going to do with the priest who was sitting in my restaurant. The phone rang, and the intake counselor from the Meadows was calling me just to check and see how I was doing. And it's probably the 3rd call I'd gotten in 6 months. But the timing of this particular call was not an accident. I needed a lot of help.
And when did this minister, when you called the attorney and you talked to the attorney, and I guess you came forward and told somebody about what happened with the priest, and you were thinking that it would get him out of the pulpit, and are you saying that it didn't?
No, he's no longer a priest. He's no longer a functioning priest.
Right, but did he leave because of this, or did he retire?
Because he hadn't retired yet. He's left the pulpit because I've come forward. He's been removed, actually, by the bishop here in Austin.
Okay. Any other questions? Kristen?
What you have experienced really is like, I have a lot of friends that were in the service in Vietnam, and you see them on the street sometimes out here. I don't know them personally, but they experience PTSD, and basically that's what you have experienced here. And I just wanted to put that for the record, because that kind of sometimes that kind of behavior is not displayed immediately. It can go on for years before it tricks off, So by even though it was in a negative that this individual approached you again, it kind of startled you, nevertheless, it kind of prompted you to actually seek help. And so, thank you very much.
And just one last thing, that you're absolutely correct. I was diagnosed immediately as post-traumatic stress disorder. I was diagnosed as with multiple food addictions and love avoidance and many other, but PTSD was the first thing that was one of the first diagnoses.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand that PTSD is something very common. And just Saturday, I was in Raymondville, Texas, and it was a ceremony to honor 5 Marines that had just come back from Iraq, and I spoke to them since I've been in the Marine Corps, and all of them told me, "What do we do? We're having nightmares and all this stuff." I said, "Well, don't hold it inside you, man. You need to talk about it," which is what I did when I came back. You know, I get my nightmares and all this kind of stuff. But I know that some of my friends, there's a lot of pride allows in combat. I never talk about this kind of stuff. They're holding all that inside, the same situation, from a different angle, but you know. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't tell if this is Tommy or Tammy Burt. Tommy Burt for the bill.
My name is Tommy Burt. I am a victim and I support House Bill 838. I believe most of you have either spoke with my mom or seen the video of my predator, the sexual assault, and what happened during that case, where after I came forward, there was 50 boys that actually came forward after that. And of course, we had our day in court, and it's always, nice that you can be laughed at by a predator in the courtroom and then watch him walk out knowing that he's scot-free. Everything can't be touched. I have gone to counseling before after that, and actually some of the best counseling was in the United States Navy, where I was able to be just Tommy Burt, and no one knew and looked at me weird. In my hometown, they said, you need to forget about it. It's the past. Can't do anything. And I believe this bill will be able to, say, hey, there's no time limit to that predator anymore.
Questions? Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Nathan Corbin for the bill.
Madam Chairman, Representative Escobar. My name is Nathan Coburn. I'm here representing the national organization Mothers Against Sexual Abuse. I'm a member of the board of directors for the organization. MASA is a 15-year-old organization dedicated to the victims, the survivors, the families of survivors, and the future victims of child sexual abuse. We've heard today of several cases of clergy abuse. This issue includes, but is larger than that. We see in our news clergy abuse. We see cases of incest, as was mentioned earlier today. In Florida, we see cases where it's neither incest or clergy abuse, but simply child predators taking advantage of kids, kids available to them. I'm an attorney here in Austin. I'm neither a victim nor a family member of a victim, but I'm representative of the concerned citizens of Texas that care about our laws and our children. I'm here in support of HB 838. This is a bill that not only has the support of survivors and the families of survivors, it has the support of citizens that want our state safe for children. It has the support of district attorneys throughout this state, including Dallas County, including Harris County. And I believe that, as far as the critics of this bill, I have not heard any strong defenses why this bill should not become law. For the legal reasons, from my modest perspective as an attorney, the legal reasons for statute of limitations support this bill, and I would urge both of you to endorse it to make it good law for Texas, good law for the children and the grandchildren in Texas. Any questions, Representative?
Representative Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, sir. You mentioned that it was just for mothers, the organization that you represent. Do you have any fathers that are concerned about their children?
Absolutely, as I would not fall into that mother's category, but as a concerned advocate. It was Claire Reeves, the founder of Mothers Against Sexual Abuse, founded it with close guidance and support as an advocate from the founder of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So there may be a little explanation in history for the name there.
Okay, I just want to find out because, again, if we have a situation where only the women are concerned about these issues, the men have to take a certain amount of responsibility, and that's why I was asking if fathers were involved in this thing.
We do have fathers members. Obviously, I'm up here as a member of the board of MASA, and am not a mother, although probably been called that outside of 1 or 2 courtrooms. But are there any other questions, Madam Chairman?
I have another couple of questions. You mentioned that you mentioned the major big cities in Texas that were concerned about this: Harris County, Dallas County, obviously Burke County, and Travis County. But how about, do you have attorneys that support this in South Texas, in small little communities?
I know that we do have explicit endorsement from Caldwell County, from Rusk County. I'm probably going to blank Guadalupe County.
Oh, okay, good. I had asked Representative Riddle some questions. Do you have any expertise in that area?
I believe your questions were to the percentage of sexual assaults that occurred where the perpetrator was a woman. Please understand this is off the top of my head, but trying to be as accurate as possible. I believe the statistic is somewhere the high 80% to maybe low 90% of perpetrators are male. There definitely there are occurrences, and there, no less real occurrences where you do have female perpetrators. In fact, who have personal knowledge of such a situation. But
one other question, and might be my last question. Do you all do any education to parents, especially where they sometimes let their children, the girls especially, dress up very sexually provocative? They make up a lot, and you see girls that are 14 years old, and you look at them and you think they're 20-some years old. And I know that sometimes I've spoken to parents about issues like that, and they say, well, my daughter is 14 and she thinks she's 25 years old. And sometimes, and I'm not saying that, I'm not defending the predators, but I think that as parents, we also have a certain amount of responsibility to ensure that our children are educated in those type of situations.
To answer your question, I'll answer this in 2 parts, Representative Escobar. One, yes, MASA is largely an educational organization, educate parents and families that have not experienced their families have not been touched by sexual abuse, you heard earlier today about, registration by sexual predators. How many of you have checked on the internet to see if there's a sexual predator living near you? It's not for the person who's not a victim, the person who's not a survivor or family member. That's not an ordinary precaution that we take into consideration. But is it something that, it is something that we inform parents about? Maybe you do want to plug in your address and see if there's someone nearby. Maybe you do want to talk to your kids about, not only strangers, but people they know, the precautions to prevent sexual assault. So yes, we are an educational body. We do try to take a proactive, preventative educational stance. To address your question, a child regardless of what they wear, regardless of how they behave,
Sure.
is never their fault. And that's no different than the police officer asking the victim in the bar, well, what were you wearing that night? That is an accusation of the victim. That is an accusation of the victim, not the perpetrator. Regardless of a child's, regardless of a woman's, regardless of a man's behavior, that is not what motivates or causes a sexual criminal or a child sexual predator, and it is never an excuse or an explanation.
And you're right about that on the, how many of you had checked into the internet? It was probably about 4 years ago that me and my daughter were having a conversation regarding this particular item because it was all over the media. I think it was about 4 years ago, where a district judge required that in our area down in South Texas that you place a sign if you're a sexual abuser or predator. So we talked about it, and she said, well, let's look at the internet. And we looked at the internet, and all of a sudden we started finding out, I said, golly, that's the guy that we go to the drive-through, drive in to pick up Cokes or whatever, and he's the one that's there. And we didn't know he was. And then we found a whole bunch of others. I found some people that I knew from families back that this individual an uncle had sexually abused a nephew. And that was, it created some problems, obviously, for the family. But I didn't know that, but I found that information on the internet.
But if you were to poll your constituents or your friends and family, they probably haven't checked. They probably think if they don't live next door to, a flop house, that, they don't live next door to a sexual predator. And, they would be surprised if they checked, probably.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
One of the things we do, sir, in these committees is to try to get information, all the information that we can, so that we can make an educated guess as we deal with these bills, because we're no experts on all of the issues that we deal with, but even though we'd like for you to think that we are.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was sort of looking through the witness affirmations, and I didn't see where there was a therapist or anyone that could ask a couple of questions for me. So let me ask you something as an attorney, because you may be familiar with this. What is meant by repressed memory? Could you explain that to me?
I think, repressed memory, just in a general description, is that if I were to ask you, did you ride horses when you were 7? And you said, no, we didn't ride horses when I was a little kid. Yes, we did. Either way. In this specific instance, we're talking about being the victim of sexual abuse, is that it is where the post-traumatic stress that Representative Escobar described has so impacted a young developing mind that the mind, as the ultimate defense mechanism, shuts out that part of memory. And literally the person going through life is doesn't consciously acknowledge that they were the victim of child sexual abuse. You heard Mr. Hill's testimony earlier where there were triggering events that brought it to the forefront for him. By chance seeing something on the Oprah show, that was something that was triggered in him the memories, the acknowledgement of, yes, I was a childhood victim. But it is not uncommon, and it's not, the validity is definitely substantiated, that it does occur within some victims that post-traumatic stress so impacts and not just children, it can happen to adult victims as well, that the realization, the acknowledgement, the memory of it is tucked away in the darkest of closets of the brain and shut off to protect them from the horror of their own experiences.
So it could be 40, 50 years before I remember this, or?
Yes.
Representative Escobar?
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
And I'm referring to my own personal experience here. And we go back to the military for PTSD. It's a very important topic because I've read a lot about it after trying to help many of my fellow veterans. But there was a situation that happened to me in Vietnam that I don't know if it happened, if it took place 10 minutes, 1 minute, an hour, I don't know. We were in a hill and we were getting overrun, and I started firing what you call a M16 machine gun or rifle, fully automatic. And then when I came to, I had a M60 machine gun in my hands. I don't know where that other rifle went to, and I'm crying. So I don't know what happened there. I've talked to my wife about it. She's sitting back over there, and I don't know. And I've always wondered what happened for that time. And I don't know, like I said, whether it was 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but that was part of the problem. That somewhere in the back, in the darkest part of my mind, and I wish one day that I could find out what really happened, because it's always been a mystery to me. But I just thought I'd clarify.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Crystal Miller to testify for the bill.
Hi, how are y'all? Thank
Fine.
you so much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Crystal Miller. I'm with SNAP in San Antonio. I'm the secretary. I'm a victim of clergy abuse. I was abused from 12 to 21 years old. I didn't really come to talk about that because that's neither here nor there. That was in the past. I've been hospitalized and dealt with a lot of problems and continue to deal with them today. My main concern, though, is my 4-year-old and your children, my children, and from here on out, the kids, grandkids, and the kids my kids play with, and what's going to happen in the future, because in a class of 20, I'm sure there's 2, 3, 4 of them that are getting sexually abused, and statistics prove that, or will be abused, and that's what's frightening. And these are sweet children, and we need to protect these kids. These are our future. They'll be up here someday, where you guys are sitting, and they're our precious commodities. And this is the silent abuse. We're not talking about bruises and things that teachers pick up on. And I know from experience that this is an embarrassing thing, and I didn't come forward. I didn't want to tell anybody, and they won't either. You hide these things because you're ashamed, you're scared, you don't want to hurt. You don't want to hurt the abuser because you love them. You don't want to tell your parents because you don't want to shame them, and you don't realize the repercussions of what's going to happen because I didn't have a baby till I was 28 years old. I didn't have a family. I went through 3 divorces first, and so I've been on medications, tried, suffer from depression and all these things, and like I said, been hospitalized. I've tried to rationalize that it's always something else, and have dissociative disorder. Try to disassociate myself from situations that are stressful that way, and from caring that way. My daughter is my number one thing, and I've got a wall up to my husband and to everybody else because that way I don't get hurt. And I don't want my child to have to go through this. I check that website daily, and I've got those names memorized of everybody in my area who is a sexual predator. Because by God, if I see somebody on the road or walking down the street near her school or, near our house, I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling the police because I don't want them coming near. And she goes to a Catholic school, and I keep tabs on the priest there because that was who my abuser was, and he was never brought to justice, even though he was abusing other children, and he is out of the country. And so, you know, and this bill's not going to do anything to help me or get this guy, but it will protect my daughter and her friends, I think. But and I pray that this will, you know, soften your heart to our future in our children, and please consider it. I appreciate you all listening to my spiel. So, do you have any questions?
Representative, do you have any questions? Let me ask a couple.
Yes, ma'am.
How old were you when this occurred?
The grooming started when I was 12. He was a youth group leader and also the high school youth group leader. He was a seminarian, and both of us moved away. He kind of picked me as a pet. I lived out in the country, and he was from a influential family in the city. And then about 14, the inappropriate behavior started. And 14 and 15, he played these trust games and inappropriate behavior. And he kind of introduced me to the arts and to things that just weren't appropriate for my age, and started, you know, promising me things and taking me places that were above me but training me. And then when I was 16, I had a closed head injury, a car accident, and I was in a coma, and I was very angry, having a difficult time dealing with that because it was a frontal head injury, which is the emotional part of the brain, so it's back and forth. Well, he came in every morning and every evening, and he was, you know, kind of my advisor. By this time, he was a priest. And he was, you know, paid special attention to me. So at any rate, that's when the sexual intercourse and that kind of thing began.
Are you in the coma?
No, right after I got out of the coma. And my parents had warned him about, you know, they trusted him. And my parents encouraged this relationship and said, you know, please, she's very, very vulnerable at this time. My neurosurgeon had a meeting with him and said, you know, she's extremely vulnerable. She's on the level of about a 13-year-old. And do not mess with her mind right now because she's kind of reabsorbing, just kind of retraining her thoughts and reworking out the thought processes. Well, boom, that was his whole chance. He was...
So are you saying, though, that these adults were aware of what he was doing?
No, there was another priest aware of it and did not protect me, had known me since I was in the 4th grade, did not protect me. He is still in San Antonio. He's about 70 years old. The archbishop at the time in San Antonio, who just retired, was aware of it.
And what about that neurosurgeon that you mentioned?
Neurosurgeon was not aware of it, did threaten him that if he found out of any kind of situation, I just saw the neurosurgeon, and he was not aware of it, but he had told him if anything happened to me, he would, do something about it, and if I ever confided in him, because the neurosurgeon and I had become very close. But he suspected it and put it in his notes, and I just went to see him this year, and he had written in his notes that he suspected that, and I needed to confirm that, partially because of the information I needed to take to I ended up in a mental hospital this year. For my husband and I were having marital problems due to my emotional issues, and I needed to I had to go into a sexual abuse program for a while, so to get some things ironed out.
Let me ask a question, because I'm relatively dumb about this, and I'm just trying to figure it out. How long ago did this happen to you?
I'm 32 3 years old now. And so the last time I saw him was 21. And it started when I was 12. So that was, I guess, about 12 years ago was the last time I saw him.
Right. So are we saying, though, that he was doing whatever it was he was doing to you from the time that you were 12 until you were 21?
Mm-hmm. The grooming started at basically...
Give me that word again.
Grooming.
What is that?
Okay, grooming is kind of where they start to earn your trust, and they start to kind of mess with your mind. I love you. I understand you. Nobody will ever love you the way that I love you. Nobody can understand you but me. God wants us to be together always. He would tell me things like, you need to marry a rich man to take care of us.
But
rich old man, that was it.
Did you consider those things, though, to be sexual?
No, he would ask me to do certain things that were inappropriate, but weren't completely there. You know, they weren't intercourse, but they were inappropriate. But I never saw it because I trusted him. I mean, he was just, you know, when you're raised Catholic, it's almost like a priest is just about one step down from Jesus, you know. They're the closest thing.
But he never did anything with you sexually, right?
Yes, he did. That became, it became a sexual relationship when I was 16, right after the car accident.
Do you think, though, that it's a little bit different today at all with the children being knowledgeable? You know, like 23 years ago, 25 years ago, before we really got into all this sex offender stuff in 1995,
mm-hmm.
you know, I agree. I think that people, especially children, were not knowledgeable. Things were happening to children that they did not tell. I'm pretty sure of that. But I think, though, today there is also a different knowledge among children and parents teaching them. And do you think that's helpful to children at all?
My parents, we had a really open relationship, and we discussed everything, but I was so afraid. We were a working family, and my parents worked hard, and I just could not put anything more on them that would stress them out anymore. And that was my feeling, was that if, you know, that to me was too much. Was just, and that was the whole feeling. I could tell them just about anything, but I did not want to cause them any more heartache or stress them anymore. And when I finally told my folks,
how old were you at that time?
When I told everybody, I was about 29, or, you know, I finally said, you know, my dad was just furious. My mother she's still a devout Catholic. And, I mean, we didn't miss church unless, you know, we had our last rites. And she's just, to this day, and they felt like they failed me. They failed me as parents. And so it's hard for parents to deal with those kind of things. And education in the school system is still, I mean, you can educate parents and you can educate kids, but parents want to stick their heads in the sand. And I have a problem with a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. I understand what you're saying when you're charging a 19-year-old with, is that what you're saying when you?
Me?
Yes. Did you?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were talking about when you statutory rape of a 19. You know. See, okay.
No, ma'am.
Because that's a whole different issue. But that gets labeled with the sex offender forever. But kids in there, it's a different. I understand what you're saying about kids in the knowledge and teaching in school and the ability today that it's different. But I don't think kids, and especially if you're 7 years old, I just don't think. And a lot of times it's in the family. It can be Uncle Joe or whoever. I don't think they tell. I just don't think, kids are comfortable. No matter how much you keep that door open, I think kids are embarrassed.
Representative Escobar.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a couple of questions. You said you were married, or you had 3 divorces.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm kind of on the third. I mean, I'm not divorced yet, but it looks like it's headed that way.
Okay.
Well, I've had, yeah.
But all of this, you think that it would happen? The ones that you have divorced, the divorces you had to do with some kind of a behavior on your part in relationships to your spouse at that time?
They've been abusive relationships. I tend to pick abusive men, even though,
abusive physically and verbally?
And emotionally.
Emotionally, yeah. Okay.
I keep falling back in the same patterns. I can't seem to break it, and then I shut down emotionally because of the DD, the dissociative disorder.
Do you avoid crowds?
I'm sorry?
Do you avoid crowds?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I do most of the time, and I get nervous, and so a lot of times I can't. I'm very outgoing, but then a lot of times I can't deal with things. So, like tomorrow, I'll stay in bed all day, or for the next 2 days, because it's just too much. You know what I'm saying, emotionally.
Yeah, I don't want to put you through all of that. I just
No, that's fine.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
And if you were to walk into a restaurant right now, and the restaurant was totally empty, there was nobody there yet, and the waiter would tell you, sit wherever you want to sit, where would you go and sit?
Probably the corner.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. The chair calls on Andy Kahn to speak for the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Andy Kahn. I'm the Mayor's Crime Victims Director for the City of Houston, and I'm in support of Representative Riddle's House Bill 838. Just as a matter of factual record, there are 17 states with similar laws currently. 11 have no statute of limitations on children, and 6 have no statute of limitations, whether it's an adult or a child. A few sessions ago, we had another issue involving statute of limitations, and that involved hit-and-run fatalities, in which, believe it or not, there was actually 3 years from the time that a person was struck and killed from the time that you had to solve that crime. Eventually, we had that repealed, and now there's unlimited, just like in any other murder case. So we've dealt with issues involving this arbitrary number of statute of limitations before. As a matter of information, federally, in April 30th, 2003, President Bush signed Senate Bill 151, which is allow the prosecution of child sex crimes during the entire life of the victim. So basically, this bill would just be mirroring and echoing what the President has signed into law. We also like to read into record support from our local district attorney, Charles Rosenthal of Houston, who basically states that, frankly, he doesn't believe that the passage of this bill will result in more prosecutions statewide, but he understands that individuals who are preferential pedophiles rarely, if ever, are cured from this prediction, and he wholeheartedly supports our efforts before this legislation. House Bill 838 gives hope, and hope certainly should not ever be maxed out with time. This bill, frankly, when you break it down into simplicities, it's a very simplistic tool. It gives prosecutors their discretion, whether they feel that there's proper evidence to prosecute a crime, and that's really all this is about. And that's why we wholeheartedly support Representative Riddle, and we hope that you see light in allowing victims who, for whatever reason, whether it be 11 years, 15 years, decide to come forward, and there's enough evidence to have a case that they can't be told by the district attorney, well, sorry, it's been 10 years, it's too late. At least give them the opportunity to decide for themselves whether the case deserves prosecution or not. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The only question or comment I have is that really the results we would see was, if this bill would go into effect, would be that currently it's 10 years, so in actuality it would be 11 years up the road. So we wouldn't see any results if it would pass into law till the year 2016.
Yeah, but it'd be nice to tell
Sure.
the future generation that.
Well, what it would do is it also puts a predator in a check where it would say, you know, I better watch what I do, because if I do it, you know, the statute of limitations is not going to be 10 years.
Sure, clock is ticking, and you can't check that off on the calendar anymore. You betcha it's a win-win for everybody.
Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Thank you, sir.
The chair calls Whitney S. Whiteman for the bill. Did I pronounce your last name correct, sir? Whiteman. Okay. You gotta realize that sometimes I confuse my Spanish vowels with my English vowels. I'm just joking with you.
Well, those are good German vowels, so blame my grandfather for that.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Whitney Wiedemann, Madam Chair, Representative, and I'm speaking for the bill. And I've heard a number of the questions. There are, I would just, given the hour, mention three particular cases. First and foremost, today, I selected this morning a jury on a sexual assault of a child case. In a room of 63 Caldwell County residents, I asked the question, has anyone here been affected by this sort of crime? Personally, a family member, a close friend, 28 people held up their hand. Of that, I counted about 45 children named who had been victims of crime of this nature, and of those 28 people, 17 said the cases had never been reported. One woman said that her first report of it was in fact today, and I would like to say that that was a unique situation. It was not. I have had that happen before, where, and this, when you ask them what made you today mention for the first time in your whole life that somebody did this to you, their answer is nobody ever asked. Another case that I'm currently prosecuting involves a minister who is engaged in improper contact with parishioners and young members of his church for many years. One case, the victim came forward at age 26, so within this current limitations period. The reason that she came forward is because her cousin, who is 30, came out and said, yes, it happened to me. My 8-year-old is in fact the product of a relationship with this man that began when I was 15. She was also the daughter of the church secretary. And so, because she did not report it until age 30, I'm barred from prosecuting him for that offense.
May I ask you a question?
Certainly.
She was 15.
Yes.
No one tried to find out how she got pregnant or by whom?
She became pregnant at 22. The relationship continued. And so that the action, I can prove that they had sex, certainly from the child, but because she was an adult at that point, that was the 3-year statute of limitation that's currently in place for sexual assault. So there's no activity that he has engaged in with this woman that I can use criminally. I might be able to put it on as evidence, certainly in punishment phase, when we're addressing what to do with him. But the third case I'll mention is one that I think really drives home the point of this bill, and you mentioned the delay, and I believe Mr. Khan is right when he says that you're not going to see a big jump in prosecution statewide. I would anticipate if you saw 10 in a given year that would fall under the difference between the current statute of limitations and this one, I would be astounded. It's not going to happen a lot. But what I saw was I was prosecuting a man for the anal rape of his niece. And this happened because his younger sister needed a babysitter. his younger sister, who herself had been a victim at age 13 of a sexual assault by him. What it really is going to do is allow us the flexibility to go after people before they get to the next generation. The example I know, Ms. Burt, who's worked very hard around the Capitol on this bill and its companion in the Senate, of a man who engaged in these behaviors for 30 years. It doesn't stop, and within families particularly, they will go after the next generation given the opportunity.
The cases that you just cited, are these people that you are prosecuting today for violations today, or are they older violations past the 25 years, let's say? Of those cases, I mean, the lady who made the comment today that this was the first time she reported is in her 40s. So obviously, given current law, there's nothing I can do about that. She could give me details. She could have the pair of panties that she was wearing that night with bodily fluid still in them from the defendant, and there's nothing I could do about it. The case involving the minister is an ongoing prosecution, and his 30-year-old victim is out of play for me in terms of prosecution, which would immeasurably strengthen my case for the other woman. If I had two, my case is that much stronger. And in the third case, we were able to successfully prosecute the man for molesting his niece, but if mother had been able, and that's the dynamic that really hits is, I heard the comments about repressed memory. Above that is, if this is happening within the family, where do you go? A case I prosecuted not long ago, the girl did finally tell, but in one case, and she reported it within the statute, but she was a child and her mother died and her father was all that was there. And so when he began to molest her, to her that was what a father-daughter relationship was supposed to be, because she didn't know any different. And so kids they're not always even aware that what's happening is wrong. Some part of them feels it's wrong, but they don't know how to express it, and this is the person they love and trust and rely on. And so sometimes it is many years before they are able to confront what did happen, and that what did happen was beyond what was appropriate for a family member. And there are still problems of proof and the ability to proceed in these cases, but I think giving this at least gives an option where the case is something that we can go forward on, where we do have evidence, where there is anything in support of an account. It gives us the option to pursue it. Okay, I'm trying to still figure this out. The cases that you are working on now, maybe you did tell me this and I just missed it. Okay. Are any of these cases current cases where these guys, like let's say the gentleman that had anal sex with his niece, when did he do that? He did that. That is within the statute of limitations period. What I'm saying is that Let me ask you a question. Okay. When did that occur? That occurred in 2001 and was reported in 2002 and was prosecuted in 2003. Okay. And with one of the other cases that you mentioned, when did that occur? The minister case that I'm working right now, she is now 27. It happened when she was 15, so 1993. And she, as I say, came forward because her cousin mentioned that she too had been a victim. And so, but she had been a victim in 1990. That was where the lady was 30 and the statute of limitations had run out on her? Yes. And the third case was? The third case, just as I mentioned today, that when I picked that jury, and out of 63 people, 28 said they or someone they knew closely had been a victim of a sexual assault involving a child. And one lady who is in her 40s said that today was, in fact, the first time she had told anyone. Thank you. Allison Taylor, neutral on the bill? Rhonda Kirkendall to testify for the bill. Ms. Kirkendall, if you would please state your name and who you represent for the record.
My name is Rhonda Kirkendall, and I represent myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Thank you for hearing our bill today. First, I'm just going to give you just a quick overview of the reason why that I'm here. My two sisters and I were mixed up with a predator. His name is Mark Phillip Turner, TDC 6066569. On separate weekend visits, we were sexually assaulted and mixed up in a child pornography ring. When my mother was notified of the abuse immediately after it happened, we were told by my mother that we were not to talk of the abuse. She did not report the crimes to the police, and she told us that she would have him killed. So the remainder of our childhood, we just had to keep quiet. Even with that said, over the years, there was reports made. In 1985, we reported it to doctors at UTMB Galveston. In 1988, when my parents were fighting for custody, we actually reported it to the Harris County District Court. All of these records I actually have were the allegations of sexual abuse, and it even names the perpetrator in all of the court documents in the doctor's records. When I went to the Pasadena Police Department in June of 2004, that was the first time that I spoke publicly of the abuse. On that visit, Detective Ragsdale gave me Mark Turner's history. He had been convicted in 1971 in Texas, 1983 in Kansas, 1990 in California, 1991 back in Texas again. His last conviction was on sexual performance by a child on a girl in Lubbock. And in that case, there were actually two girls. They plea bargained one, and so he was only convicted on one. He got 40 years. He's been allowed to serve good time, and he'll be getting out July 3rd, 2006, and it's a mandatory release. At that time, when I went to go report the crime to the Pasadena Police Department, I had no idea there was a statute of limitations. After I found out from the Pasadena Police Department that he would be released, I then went to the Lubbock District Attorney. I gave her all the evidence, and her words to me after reviewing all the evidence, after like a 2-week, 3-week period, she said to me on the phone that she looked at every way to toll the statute of limitations, and it was impossible. She was very sorry. She knew that it would, she knew that the abuse happened, but there was nothing that she could do because of the law. So I'm in support of House Bill 838 because if it were law when I was attacked, I would be able to bring charges against Mark Turner. And although defense attorneys say we have no evidence or the whole evidence argument against House Bill 838, I have the evidence. For 24 years, I kept my plane tickets where I was flown back from Lubbock. For 24 years, I've kept on my wrist, I had to wear a little heart because I was a minor without an adult. The perpetrator actually completed the heart. This heart is what we used to find him at the Pasadena Police Department. It's his correct name, it's his correct address, and even his correct phone number. And one interesting fact with Turner is that he used little mementos that he sent his victims home with. I got a scrapbook, and the scrapbook was inscribed on the front cover, "Love you, Pumpkin, Mark Turner." Mark Turner is a habitual career pedophile. He is not going to stop what he's doing. I know that with this bill, it's a bill about hope because it's not going to help my case. And my best explanation of why I'm standing before you is only that I remember what it felt like to be told you were too late. The amount of guilt when that little girl, Lunsford, was killed in Florida, I sat up the morning that the news broadcast was relayed, and I said a prayer to God, please, when Mark Turner gets out, do not let him do this. Because if he does, I will hold some guilt. I will hold some responsibility because 6 years ago, I was too late. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, though?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you mentioned evidence and you said you have some, and that you have the plane tickets, but even with the documents you have, what in, and I'm just asking because I don't know,
yes, ma'am.
What in those documents would be used as evidence that he sexually abused you?
Well, it's very, one point of order, well, on the doctor's notes, it actually talks about how she came in and reported being sexually assaulted by Mark Turner. We went to the police department that would be covering what UTMB Galveston would cover at the police department. I went to the police department. I said, I'm looking for a police report. The Lubbock District Attorney said, Rhonda, if you can get me a police report, we'll toll the statute of limitations and we'll bring charges against him. When I went to the police department, I was told by the police department, after the statute of limitations expires, they destroy the police reports. The evidence that I needed to toll the statute of limitations was destroyed by the police department after the statute of limitations expired. So there were none. I can tell you from this evidence that I have before me, it puts me in his hands. But I'm not only one witness. It was also my two sisters. And my two sisters would testify to what I'm saying.
When did they do the police report? Was it before the statute ran out or after?
It was before 1985.
And why did they not arrest him?
Well, in 1985, that would have been when he was in Kansas. He was convicted and again, I guess they didn't do the research to know that he was in a Kansas penitentiary because he was convicted in 1983 in Kansas. The logic from looking at his records is such that back in 1981, when my mother said, I want you to return every photograph that you took of my daughters, it got hot in Texas, so we figured out a different way to go. He fled to Kansas, and 2 years later, okay, we were with him in 81. By 83, he was already in the Kansas penitentiary. Then he followed to California penitentiary, and now he's back in Texas.
Questions?
Thank you again.
Thank you. Felicia Watson, testifying for the bill.
Madam Chair, Representative Escobar. My name is Felicia Wasson. I'm an Assistant District Attorney with the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, where I also serve as Deputy Chief of the Child Abuse Unit. I don't think that I could say anything more eloquent than that which this committee has already heard this evening, certainly by the author of the bill, the numerous advocates that are here, or certainly the survivors. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned that I have seen as I have worked with men and women like those that have come to this committee hearing this evening and given their testimony is that what differentiates a murder victim from a child abuse victim is a very important difference. A murder victim, unfortunately, loses their life, but a child sexual abuse victim struggles with the loss of their soul, and they fight for that day after day after day. And we've already heard so many reasons this evening why it takes them so long to tell and how difficult that is for them. But their courageous stories, when they do tell, are quite compelling. And there are cases that my district attorney's office, I'm proud to say, wins on the sheer testimony of the victim alone. I'm sure that no one in this room doubts the sincerity or the truth of the stories that the survivors in this courtroom this evening have told. You can hear it in their voice, and you can see it on their faces. And they have the right to have those stories told and to have somebody listen to them. And yes, to have a jury believe them if a jury does. That's the difference. There's no statute of limitations for the offense of murder, and there shouldn't be one for these offenses either. There doesn't have to be. And I don't know the statistics regarding murder, and I couldn't give them to the committee. And I don't even have specific statistics this evening on the offenses of child sexual abuse. But I know that sexual offenders commit these crimes over and over and over again. Their appetites are huge, and they are never full. They never quit, and we don't have to either. These are crimes that we can prevent in future if given the opportunity, and this is one of them. For these reasons, and for those reasons previously given by all the speakers before me, we are in favor of this bill, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Let me just ask maybe one, or I have a statement, I guess. The lack of evidence in many cases, ma'am, it does concern me.
Absolutely.
Murder, we continue to talk about murder with there being no statute of limitations, and I think it's a little bit different because in most cases, there is some kind of evidence, or there was a body, there was something that you can use as evidence in a murder case, I think. What concerns me, though, is some of the cases you probably may have real evidence. Like the gentleman earlier said, something about maybe the soiled underwear. One thing, though, that I think back, this repressed memory, that concerns me. That concerns me a great deal, and I can understand a child, this happening maybe to a child being afraid to come forward and tell. But you know, when you get 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, and in Texas you have until you're 28. So for me, my mother, and this is just me, my mother might not have done anything about that, but then when I get to an age, I probably would have done something. I mean, I don't know. So it's a little bit confusing for me. But let me tell you two things I think of as I listen to the people here. I'm kind of reminded of the priest, all of these priests who we recently heard about. And I guess in those cases we had repressed memory, and there was no evidence, I guess, presented. I don't know, because I didn't follow them all that closely. But at least some of those priests eventually said that they did do that. But I'm also reminded here recently of the Bill Cosby situation, too, where you had several women, one claimed that after the other, but then it turned out that really wasn't, I guess, true. So, you know, it's a real moving target here that at least I have some concerns about it both ways. You're absolutely correct. I want to protect the children, and I tell you this right now, any child that's abused, we have laws on the books for people who deal with whether it's children or adults in these sexual offenses. But I do have some real concerns, and to tell you that this is really important to me, I got all this information here about this repressed memory and the 80-year-old people and different people, you know, who come forward eventually and talk about this. And one thing that really concerns me is that when we pass this bill, personally, ma'am, I hope this is a bill that prosecutors can deal with this repressed memory coming forth and really deal with perpetrators. But, you know, I've got a real problem to a real degree, and even in the documents that I received this afternoon, it's all about lawyer. It's all about lawyer. And there's no point in me, you know, not being truthful here. I have a real concern about that. I heard from some attorneys as it relates to these kind of cases that I didn't hear about talking to me about try to restore the CHIPS insurance program. I didn't hear from them to tell me anything about education. But I've heard from some of the people talking about on some concerns that many members even have is how does this enter in with lawsuits as it deal with inheritance and basically everybody here until we got the DAs on the floor. Priest, I'm just wondering, man, I was a Catholic before I became a Lutheran and looked like everybody got messed with by a priest but me. So, you know, this is a very serious issue. It's a very important issue. We have a lot to weigh, both sides, and I don't think it necessarily means that we want to have people running around abusing children and you know, if they decide to tell about it when they're 80 years old, they should be able to do that. But it's a pretty tough call on this. I don't know.
And Chairperson, did you want me to comment on the repressed memory?
Please. You know what? And I'm real disappointed that in these documents you talk about various and sundry therapists who have helped these people with these memories, even to the point that some of them have had people go to court, and now many people are suing the therapist based on the information that they brought about with them with these repressed memories, and they ended up in the courts, and the cases were dismissed. So I would have loved to have some therapist here that could really help me to understand what I have been reading through all weekend about this repressed memory.
Certainly, and I apologize. I can't speak to that either. You know, I'm not a therapist, and I don't want to be misleading in any respect, but I've prosecuted exclusively child sexual abuse offenses for almost 4 years now at the Dallas DA's office. I've never had a case involving a repressed memory, so I can't speak directly to those issues. I do call experts and therapists and counselors who work with the victims I've had on my cases routinely during trials, those who have visited with them. Some of what they tell a therapist is admissible at trial, some of it isn't. And I know of no other colleague of mine in the child abuse unit who has ever had a repressed memory case either. I've had cases involving children as young as 3 all the way up to 24, I think was the oldest victim that I've taken to trial, at the time of trial, not when the offense was committed. So I can't share or say that I've had to deal with that issue. I don't know that those who spoke this evening, those survivors who spoke, were suffering from repressed memory either. I didn't get that from what they said. That you very well may be right, Chairperson. I'm not saying that. What I recall is that they didn't want to talk about it and they didn't tell later, which is certainly much more common than repressed memory given my experiences. I know that, and I'm glad to hear that people feel as you do, that you are skeptical and that you want these to be cases that are cases that can be proven. That certainly is every prosecutor's desire also. I know that they're investigated by the police before they're ever filed with my office, then they've got to make it through a grand jury before they ever get to me for continued investigation and prosecution. But that's a real concern, and I think that's why there are cases that, from a prosecutor's perspective, again, unfortunately, we lose, because the jury sees that and says, I am skeptical about this, there isn't enough evidence. But because my experience also shows that there are so many cases where, with whatever evidence we have, and our laws are very clear in the state of Texas, that it's the quality of the evidence that is so significant, not the quantity, because frequently we lack quantity, but we have great quality. And that at least should be something for the jury's consideration. And if they're skeptical and if the state doesn't meet its burden of proof, which we all know is a high one, then we'll get not guilty verdicts on those cases, as we should if we fail to meet our burden.
On the case where the child was 3, I'm assuming that that's something that has occurred recently.
No, actually, that was a case that I helped prosecute probably 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, how old was the child when?
A mother walked in and saw it happening.
Right, and that was reported kind of.
It was. The mother reported it immediately.
Okay, and now talk to me about the older person.
It was a gentleman, a young man who had delayed in telling of his abuse. He was 18 when he told of his abuse that had happened when he was between the ages of 12 and 13.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I have a couple of questions.
Representative.
Thank you, ma'am. Hypothetical situation. You come from the big city. In those situations, sometimes in the bigger cities, those situations can get hidden in many ways. The person doesn't talk about it, continues going on in many ways, not necessarily a normal life, but continues on with life. But you go to a small community, the ones I represent, and that happens, the perpetrator sometimes will brag about it, okay? And that person will then, suffer even more. And so I'm asking you, have you had those type of scenarios?
I have, if I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, if I understand, you're asking me about situations where individuals in the community know of the victim's abuse and yet it isn't brought to law enforcement's attention.
That's correct.
Yes, sir. I have prosecuted those cases as well. My situations in my cases have typically involved intrafamilial abuse, where it's a parent or a step-parent that's abusing a child, and that the other members of the family can and have been aware of it and choose not to report that abuse. The child grows up, and as we've heard one survivor say, it was made known and nobody did anything about it, that it just continued, and people in the family, people in the community, friends, teachers may have known, and yet it wasn't prosecuted. The child gets old enough, realizes they have that sense of guilt that's been expressed by survivors, and they want to do something about it because they're fearful there will be other victims. So they choose to come forward, and they've said something about it. But yes, I've experienced that. And I've also experienced, by the way, assisting in the prosecution of cases involving women perpetrators. I've assisted in the prosecution of 2 of those cases in the nearly 4 years I've been a prosecutor in the child abuse unit.
Well, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for that testimony.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. John Healy to testify for the bill.
As indicated, my name is John Healy. I'm Fort Bend County's District Attorney, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself today. I support this bill because it primarily recognizes the fact that there are valid reasons, often very personal ones, why a victim of sexual assault of a child or indecency with a child might be unable to testify against a perpetrator, but late in life, possibly due to a desire to protect family members from the same perpetrator, may be able to summon the courage to testify and put a sexual perpetrator behind bars and protect untold numbers of children from a continuing pattern of abuse. I know that Representative Riddle indicated the precedent of a bill such as this in many states. I think she said 17. And also there's a federal statute that basically has abolished the statute of limitations, as long as the victim is alive. I'm aware that there's a need for closure for both victims and perpetrators of any type of crime. Yet if you're deciding whether or not to abolish the statute of limitations, we've got to look at very strong public policy reasons to hold child abusers accountable beyond the intimidation and shame which can exist well past a victim's 28th birthday. Child abusers just don't grow out of it, out of their criminal activity, like other perpetrators of many crimes. Unlike child abusers, most murderers, for whom there is no statute of limitations, usually don't continue to act out and commit serial murders. Recidivist activity is a strong characteristic of child abusers. They should not be allowed to carte blanche outlast their victims. Rather, they should be held accountable for their crimes. There's been a concern voiced in some circles as to what will keep these cases, many, many years old, from popping up and biting someone who may actually be innocent. Well, I'd like to draw your attention to certain factors that currently exist in any crime, whether there's a statute of limitations or not. Prosecutorial discretion will be used, as it is used every day, to frequently keep very weak and uncorroborated claims from being prosecuted. Prosecutors will look at things such as indirect physical evidence, outcry statements from victims, the statements of outcry witnesses, documentary evidence, and other eyewitnesses before they decide whether or not to take a very old case when you add the outcry and willingness to testify of a victim. Will untrue claims be made? I'll never look at anybody in the face and say untrue claims have never been made in criminal justice. They're made. But we've got a system that has to deal with it. We just don't fold up the tent and say, well, it's a possibility that an untrue claim could be made. And worse yet, there's a possibility that an innocent person will be convicted. We know it happens, but we don't fold up the tent of criminal justice under those circumstances. These cases, if we abolish the statute of limitations, will have to withstand the same scrutiny based on the total evidentiary picture as every other reported crime. We don't refuse to try murderers when a case finally becomes prosecutable, even though it may be dozens of years after the killing. So too, we don't automatically take a case because someone comes forward to report a crime, especially without corroborative evidence. The safeguards of prosecutors, judges, juries, and defense attorneys are always going to be there to defend against the inaccurate claim. And they will likely, as they do now, protect the vast majority of citizens from false claims. We had a recent case in Fort Bend County in which the statute of limitations had passed on a very heinous sexual assault of a child case. We were able to find that information out only because other folks whose cases were within the statute of limitations passage, hadn't happened yet, came forward, and it was a very, very weak case. We got a conviction, but barely. Had we been able to prove up a very compelling case that we eventually did in punishment, that one that was barred by the statute of limitations, my child abuse prosecutor said that a child molester would have spent much more time in the penitentiary for a crime that that person committed than he's doing now, because we had a very weak case to go on that was not barred by the statute of limitations. For the benefit of our state's children, I ask you to act favorably towards the passage of this bill. Thank you.
Questions?
Not right now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Ruth Epstein, against the bill?
I don't know if I'm the only one against it here today. I am Ruth Epstein.
I'm sorry.
And I represent the ACLU of Texas. We are against the bill. Chair Lady Hodge and Member Escobar, thank you for having this hearing. I follow sex offender legislation for the ACLU of Texas. And we are opposed to removing the statute of limitations for sexual assault of children 17 and under. We've heard some sad and terrible stories today. We are concerned for the safety of children, and we are advocates for a fair judicial system. We feel it is poor public policy to base prosecutions on faded memories by victims and witnesses, false memories, recovered memories, and/or suppressed memories. There is quite a bit of literature which Representative Hodge has referred to about the unreliability of suppressed memories. We know, if I can talk a little bit on that, we know that in divorce cases, very often one spouse accuses the other of molesting the child, and then the child, being emotionally close to the mother, will testify against the father, which is usually the case. And so, for that reason, Representative Ray Allen, who addressed the conference on the management of adult sex offenders, which I attended in February, Representative Ray Allen is opposed to removing the statute of limitations. At that conference of adult sex offenders, the conference took 3 full days, and we learned the types of sex offenders, what they had in common. By the way, that is low self-esteem. How they their different methods of operating, and how necessary treatment is, because they do repeat if their behavior is not modified by treatment. We also learned, by the way, there are some myths about sex offenders, one of which I may refer to today, and that is sex offenders do not have a background of sexual molestation themselves any more than the general population. The facts mentioned in this conference were backed up as much as possible by scientific evidence. Let me see. So I did say that this bill favors the prosecution unacceptably. And the testimony in the past has been shown to be unreliable, often has been shown to be unreliable, even false, causing damage to reputations and embarrassment all around. You have to balance the welfare of children with the rights of the accused, and we feel this bill unduly favors the prosecution.
Question?
Thank you very much for your testimony. I've got a couple of questions. Would you explain to me what you meant by shady memories?
No, I didn't say stating.
Okay, excuse me, I'm a little deaf.
Stating memories. In other words, I think we all know the longer time elapses, the less accurate our memory is. And I know sometimes my mother tells me something you sometimes think that when somebody tells you a story of what you did as a child, you hear it often enough, you then adopt it as your own memory. I think we would all agree that memory doesn't improve as time elapses.
I guess that's a matter of opinion, yeah.
Well, there is nobody who says your memory gets better.
Well, I can debate that with you, but nevertheless.
Okay.
Would you just be a little more specific as to why in this particular bill favors the prosecution favorably?
Yes, well, it gives the prosecution the ability to pursue cases he wouldn't be able to pursue otherwise. It extends the time. It does away with the statute of limitations, which would have prevented somebody from. Now, a person cannot testify as to something that happened to him as a child if he's over 28. That sort of a time limit will no longer apply.
I too was going to ask you, why did you feel there was a bill that favored the prosecution? But you really answered that. But let me ask you, what are your thoughts as it deal with lawsuits?
Well, the prosecutor he would have more of a chance because he has a longer period to work with to bring a lawsuit. Of course, there's a question of how many more lawsuits the prosecutor could bring, could pursue, and some people say a good prosecutor will examine the evidence very carefully, and this will not bring many more lawsuits. But we don't know that all prosecutors will be that assiduous.
Well, I don't think the lawsuits. I mean, I don't think the prosecutors pursue any lawsuits. I wouldn't think. Right. But I think that parents or wives or family members, because most of the information that I looked at, even that's been passed out here today, it all, like I said, and I understand it, but it all gets back to lawsuit.
Yes.
For me, I would like to see these perpetrators found, tried, and arrested. Whatever. But it's a different ring to this. It's a real different ring to this. I mean, even the priest, I think they did, I guess, what was right. But we brought down the Catholic Church pretty much. And it was more about lawsuits than it was protecting our precious little children. Because, ma'am, we have laws in place today that deals with anybody, whether you sexually fooling with a little boy or a little girl or a little man or a little woman. No problem with that. None at all. But now we say, but you know what? 28 years is not long enough, and maybe not. There are people here today that exhibit that 28 years is not long enough. And I can clearly understand this happening to you when you're very young. You don't know what to do. You're scared to tell an adult. But, ma'am, at some point, you become your own adult. At 18, at 19, at 20, and it just concerns me that you do not, you don't even get there, understanding, even at that age, that this happened to you. You still confused whether it's right or wrong. But you told me that your mother told you a long time ago, don't you say anything, and still after you become a full adult.
I think the answer was given by one of the organizations here. The answer to many of our problems is education, and I know there is some education going on in schools where children are told what is private, what isn't private, where it may not be going on in all schools, but I know it is going on in some schools. Children are told not to let somebody in the classroom by the teacher, or by the gym teacher, whoever, that they should not allow people to touch them inappropriately. I think the PTA, parents group, should be told what to tell their children. People used to say to their children, don't talk to strangers, but they need more than that now. So I think that is the positive thing we can do.
And I think, though, that since 1995, especially here in Texas, that we've gotten so involved with sex offender and sex offender law, I think parents are doing, and grandparents and all, are doing a much better job of teaching their children about the strangers, the touching improperly, and to tell this and to tell that. Because I think kids the lady said, I think kids today are doing it. Where maybe when all of us in here were kids, you didn't. You didn't because lack of education or people not wanting to be embarrassed. I don't know. But I think today kids are far more knowledgeable about it, and I think they are saying things. I just think it's so sad that even by the time a person is 28, they still don't feel comfortable enough to come forward with that.
Well, we have to balance the risks associated with stated memories and perhaps inaccurate memories, the risk to the judicial system, with protection of children, which of course we all want. And that is your job to do that balancing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Clara Adams will testify for the bill.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Representative Escobar. I am the parent of a survivor. I still say that she is a victim. Exactly 6 months ago. I'm sorry.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
For the record, just state your name.
It's Clara Spriggs Adams, hyphenated.
Who are you with?
I'm sorry?
An organization or?
No, I'm not with an organization. I'm here because exactly 6 months ago to the day, November 18th, I was informed by the perpetrator, my ex-husband, that he had been molesting my daughter since she was 7 years old. My daughter is now 35 years old. Now, why he felt the need to confess this now, I believe it's because he is aware that there is nothing that can be done about it. My daughter...
A quick question.
Yes.
Was that also his daughter?
No.
Thank you.
We had one child together, and when we were married, I had 2 children already. And this was my oldest daughter. She had apparently decided to take this information to the grave with her. This was not a case of repressed memory, and most of what I've heard tonight has not been about repressed memory, because I agree with you that I'm kind of leery about repressed memories. However, I think that the longer the silence is kept, the harder it is for the victims to come forward, because there is a lot of guilt and shame revolving around this. And since this started according to him, when she was 7 years old. That changes a person's psyche. It has to. I cannot look at a 7-year-old child now and not think about what happened to my own child. And I was the mother who thought that I could protect my children. I would never allow my children to spend the night with any of their friends for this very reason, because I have heard over and over and over from friends, relatives, neighbors, co-workers, sexual abuse of children is rampant. There are more people in this room tonight that have been victims, I would argue, than are talking about it tonight. My ex-husband also admitted to me that not only was he touching my daughter inappropriately, he was also molesting all of their friends. And he was surprised that none of them ever told. He said, why didn't they tell? He said, there were times when I just knew that somebody would say something. That was devastating to me. It was absolutely devastating to me when I think about my child sitting across the table at dinner time every night from this man that they called Dad, that we went to church with, that was a Christian. Every night you're sitting across the table from this child and you're creeping in the middle of the night and touching her inappropriately, and this is a child that you discipline, and this went on for 5 years, supposedly. I have my doubts. I wonder. We were married from the time she was 4 years old, so I'm wondering if it didn't start even earlier. So, like I said, when I asked my daughter about this, at first she was very shocked, and I could see her in her face how ashamed she was. And I said to her, I said, I thought I created an environment for y'all that made you feel safe to tell if someone was touching you inappropriately. I distinctly remember having many conversations with my daughters, asking them if anybody has ever touched you inappropriately, and they would always say no. And in a child's mind, this is what they told me, because I talked to all three of my daughters. The oldest one, who was being molested, said that the reason she didn't tell is because she thought that I would kill him. And I admit that I probably would have if I had found out about this. So she didn't want our family to be broken apart. She didn't want him to die. She didn't want me to go to jail. The middle daughter suspected that something was going on, and she didn't tell because she said that Trista is my oldest daughter that was being molested. She said she would go and stay with her biological father's family. She said, and Juan, the perpetrators, and my daughter would go and live with his family. She said, but where would I go? You were all that I had. And if you went to jail, I would have nowhere to go. And he, too, told me the same thing. He said, I said, why didn't you get help? If you knew that you were doing this and you couldn't control yourself, why didn't you get help? He said, who was I going to go to? I was in the Air Force. They would have kicked me out. You would have shot me. Who was I going to go to? So he only thought about himself. And so there are lots of other potential victims out there, because nobody can tell me that he's healed. He's not healed. If he molested all of their friends, I have 3 daughters. They had lots of friends over the years. And I've just been thinking back. My house was a house that I thought was safe. From all appearances, we were the perfect family. The children were coming to my house being molested, and I had no idea, because most children do not tell. They do not tell.
Then I guess I'm the only one to ask a question.
Okay.
You had 3 daughters.
Yes.
And they were living with a stepdad.
2 of them were stepchildren. The third one was his.
He only molested one and didn't bother the other two.
Yes.
And you think that went on from the time she was 7 until when?
That's what he admitted. He said it started when she was 7 years old until she was 12.
5 years.
5 years.
Do you mind if I ask you, as a mother, for 5 years, your daughter and all of these different friends that these 3 girls had that were coming to your home, and I guess they would be spending the night, that this man had involvement some kind of way with all these children, ma'am, and you never knew about any of them?
I understand exactly how you feel, because I, too, felt the same as you do. I felt exactly the same as you do, because in my mind, I thought that there would be some kind of telltale signs. There would be something that you could see. But these things don't happen when you are around, when you can see. And unfortunately, we're not mind readers. We are not mind readers. And if children are not telling, and you're asking if anybody, I didn't think it was within my own house, but when children are not telling, you don't know. And this wasn't happening when, I believe, I used to work nights, and I also had a lot of health problems early on in the marriage. And so I was in the hospital many, many times. And I think,
excuse me?
I'm sorry.
And then you would leave these little girls there with just the dad and no babysitter or no woman?
If you are married to someone, you're not thinking that this person is molesting your children.
No, but I mean, to me, there are just some things that a mother does. I mean, to me. And number one is just saying, okay, you're in the hospital, and I understand that, but there are some things that little girls need that men can't even do. Hair combing. Number of things.
This is true, but it sounds, I know that you think, as I used to think, that there was something, like I said, that you would see. There are things that little girls need, but if you are having emergency surgery, you don't always have someone that can step in. I mean, there were a couple of times that my mother was able to come down and stay with them. But there are times that nobody is there. And what I guess what you don't seem to understand, and I do understand how you feel, because I too felt the same way.
But it's not how I feel. It's just concerns that I have. Because I mean, I don't even know how I feel, but I'm just trying to figure out. When you mentioned your daughter, you have 3 daughters, and all of them had a number of friends.
Yes.
Not only was he molesting your child, but we don't even know how many of these other kids, 3, 6, 9, 12,
more.
15, 20. And it's just so ironic that not one of them, and you know, with girls, there's usually at least one little big mouth girl, that none of them ever mentioned the fact that Mr. whatever his name was, touch me here or touch me there.
There was one once, but this was probably in 83. This was after he stopped molesting my daughter, that one little girl did make an outcry. But she said that he touched me. He denied it. He said, oh, I just was having her. He had surgery on his knees, and he used to have the kids hold his legs while he would do sit-ups. And he said that that's all he had her to do. And she never said anything else about it.
Did you tell her mother?
She told her mother. And they never said anything else about it. Nobody ever said anything else, because I'm telling you, had I had any inkling that he really had touched her inappropriately, I would have done something about it. I'm not a desperate woman.
Did she tell you?
No, she didn't tell me.
She told her mom?
She told her mom.
Did her mom tell you?
No, her mom didn't tell
When
me.
did you
I
find
went to
out?
their house. I had gone out. We were living in England at the time, and you're required to leave the country once a year to renew your third Air Force driver's license. So I had gone out of town for the weekend, and it happened while I was out of town for the weekend.
What happened?
When this little girl said that he had touched her.
And did her mother ever come to you?
No, I went to her mother. And they just said, let's just forget about it. It's okay. Everything
Well,
is
did you all
right.
ever think that maybe that's the reason that the children didn't tell?
That what's the reason?
Because the grown-ups didn't believe them?
No, I would have believed her. I would have believed her if she had stuck to her story. If she had told me how he touched her and that whatever happened, I would have believed her.
And when she told her mother that, did you go back and ask your little girls, had it ever happened to them?
I most certainly did.
And they said no?
They said no. They said no. Because and I know this is hard for you to wrap your brain around. I do, because I, too, felt as you do. Do you have daughters?
Granddaughter.
Okay. Because you are under the same mistaken impression that I was. Because you probably are under the impression that if anybody was sexually molesting your granddaughter, that she would tell somebody. Correct?
Mine would.
Never say never, because that's what you're saying. You're saying that she would. You don't know until you find out. You don't know until you find out, because until 6 months ago, I, too, felt exactly like you. I said there's not a mother on the face of this planet that does not have instinctively know when someone is being inappropriate with her children. And I'm eating those words right now.
Well, ma'am, I guess you and I are really, really different.
Not so
because
different.
Let me just tell you, I don't know no man, husband, friend, date that I'm going to leave my little granddaughter with other than her daddy, and I'm going to check on that periodically.
Well, if you were married to the man, well, until you're in the situation, I don't think you can say that, because we're not going to be married to someone that we don't trust. And if you're in a what you think is a loving, trusting relationship, then there are times that you're not going to be able to be there. You can't be there 24/7. And like I said, I had several emergency surgeries, and there was no way I could be there. There was no way that somebody could get there as quickly as they would need to be. There's just not always somebody that can come in and care for 3 children. So, I hope that you never have the experience.
Oh, I do too.
However, never say never, because in my opinion, God has a way of making us eat those words. And I'm a living witness of that, because like I said, I have been haunted for being right, having something happen under my nose. But it supposedly never happened while I was in the house. Now, whether that's true, I don't know. But all I know is that I, too, thought I could tell. And this is how perpetrators are able to go on and on and on, is because we think that there will be some kind of sign that will tell us, or that our children will tell us, because we're teaching them. And I do think that you were right about what you said about education, that more children are coming forward, but it's minuscule. It's the great majority of children are not telling. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Barbara, and I think this is pronounced Borland, testify for the bill. And Ms. Borland, I need to get you to, if you will, to please sign the form. Right in that little corner. Right over here. Is that your son?
My name is Barbara Garcia Berlin, and today I'm representing my son, Eduardo, and a group called Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. I'm the mother of a victim of clergy sex abuse, which was followed by my son's suicide. My experience with sex abuse has been very unfortunate. The difficulty exposing sexual abuse is something no child should have to experience. I find Bill 838 urgent to be heard. As chapter leader of Survivors Network in San Antonio, I have met at least 40 survivors in 19 months, ranging from the ages 25 to 72 years old, each one explaining how difficult sex abuse is to talk about. Some are not able to realize what has happened to them until they are adults. So I feel protecting any human being and not putting limits on reporting the abuse would make a difference in protecting our future, protecting children like my only son, Eduardo. I also would like to say that my son's perpetrator was given 10 years probation and deferred adjudication. 3 months short of completing his probation, he was caught with pornography on his computer and put behind bars last year for 20 years. Unfortunately, my son was not here to see it, and I today am standing here in front of you, Chair Hodges, to ask that Bill 838 be heard. And I understand that it would not be retroactive, but I'm standing here because I know the difficulties of coming forward, and I know the pain after burying my son of having to talk about sex abuse. It is not something easy to live with.
Thank you. And Ms. Borland, let me say, I am truly sorry about your son.
Thank you for your sensitivity.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Victoria Camp to testify for the bill. If you will, Ms. Camp, please give us your name and who you represent for the record, please.
My name is Victoria Camp. I'm the Director of Operations at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. TASA is the member agency of the 80 rape crisis centers in the state of Texas. They cover approximately 200 of the 254 counties in Texas. And they see child sexual abuse victims as well as adults who are molested as children on a daily basis. The reasons for the delay in coming forward to report child sexual abuse are numerous and have been discussed today at length. The question now may be to balance public safety with the rights of the accused, and that's the question that's really left to you all. When I look at public safety and child sexual abusers, I see a public safety epidemic. 226,000 children in Texas are abused every year. 1 in 5 Texans, 1 in 5 women, and 1 in 20 men in Texas will be abused at some point in their lifetime. Only 18% of them will ever come forward to report their assault to law enforcement. Pedophiles who are abusing children don't just stop. They have an obsession to have sex and to have sex with children, and that's not going to go away. If the opportunity comes with enough of a burden of proof, they need to be able to be stopped. They will not stop until someone stops them. And that is the point of this law, is that, or this law change, is that House Bill 838 would allow prosecutors to stop these sex offenders who will continue to offend and continue to create new victims. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
When you say this law will help them to stop them, okay, what then is ineffective about current law that deal with people who are currently doing sexual offenses? Most everyone that's been before us tonight has said they will never stop, they will continue to do it. So you don't think, as far as dealing with sex offenders who are perpetrating, whether it's children or women, whatever, is that that's effective law today? This law here is to deal with something that's in the past. That's in the past. To say that in the future, effective September 1st of 2005, if somebody, you know, passed the age or didn't tell before, that they have long time. Well, if they are 35 and 40 and 45, that's really not helping us to catch, you know, these folks that's right now doing this kind of stuff. And if they are, we're catching them under current law because they are violating it today.
Except those children who they're violating against today are not coming forward. They are not, for some reasons that we've talked about today, able to come forward until they're older. Some are being caught today, absolutely, there's no doubt about that. And the number of additional prosecutions will probably not be many. The ones who will be caught under this bill change will be the most heinous, who have offended multiple times.
Right, but let's say what this bill does, this bill even would take it beyond the age of 28. So if they are molesting them now, and we don't know, so we can stop them, what will this bill do for us when you come forward at 30? I mean, as far as helping us to make the children safe, what will this bill do?
For example, if this bill were in effect, I was 30 years old, I decided to come forward and I had enough proof, perhaps pictures or video, to put this person away, that would stop the abuse of more children because we know they will continue the abuse, and it will stop them from abusing the children that they were abusing at that time.
Okay, right. But let me ask you, if let's say that person is still out there and he's abusing children, and even if you were afraid for whatever reason when you were 15, 16, 17 because your mother wouldn't allow you to do that, at that age, though, are you not going to be, and I'm just asking because I don't know, a little bit concerned that that same person that sexually abused you is still running around sexually abusing other children or other people? Would you not be concerned with that?
If I was 15 or 16?
Yes, ma'am. Or even let's turn you 18 because when this person did this to you, your mom told you not to tell it, and so you didn't do that. But now you are 18 years old, and you still see that guy. And like you said, he's never going to stop. He's going to continue to do it. Would you not want to tell somebody then?
I think a lot of the victims do want to tell, and they are not able to get to that point where they feel like they can. Perhaps the perpetrator is someone who's close to their family, and even though that they're 18, they're worried about their family being ripped apart. If it's an uncle, a grandfather, the impact that would have on their family is too much for them to bear at that point. Oftentimes, from the experiences that I hear from rape crisis centers, those 18-year-olds are fearful. But it's when they get married and have their own families and see how important it is to protect their children that's when they're able to step forward and take that risk when it comes to protecting their own.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Keith Hampton, against the bill. Mr. Hampton, would you please give us your name and tell us who you represent for the record, please?
My name is Keith Hampton, and I represent the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. Let me first tell you that before and as I went through law school, I was a child advocate. So the stories that I hear from a lot of these people, I have a great deal of empathy for. But I've been an attorney now for about 15 years, and I have represented people who have been falsely accused because of the lack of reliable evidence. If you will look at the exonerations that have occurred over the last 2 years, they have almost all been false accusations because originating from a child. Let me point out a couple of things that I've heard. The reason we've got a statute of limitations is to encourage law enforcement, not just law enforcement, everybody, society in general, to claim the evidence while it's still fresh and to give the court the greatest chance of reaching the correct verdict, the reliable verdict. Right now, as we stand, a person who comes in and says, "You did this to me 25 years ago," that's going to be pretty difficult for you to defend. They don't have to give you a date or a time that's accurate. They don't have to tell you, anything like that. If they were to accuse you of having done it yesterday, you'd be able to defend yourself. Further you go back in time, the harder it is. Now, let me address one thing that you brought up, which is about the repressed memory syndrome. Memory, as Elizabeth Loftus, she's been the lead researcher in this. She's the one that's shown how innocent people are falsely accused by bad eyewitness identification. The person may absolutely and totally believe it and be absolutely and totally wrong. It's been repeatedly demonstrated. But it's even more pernicious in this area of the law. There is some research that does suggest that we do experience repressed memories. They are distorted memories oftentimes, but they may be relating to an actual event. Here's the scary thing, what the same research that's proceeding forward is discovering. There's another syndrome, false memory syndrome. That is a memory of something that never happened. And the horror of this is that the person right now, they can call a person to the stand, put them on there, that person can accuse you and absolutely and totally be honest and absolutely and totally believe it and be completely wrong. The person themselves who suffer from the false memory syndrome cannot tell the difference between a repressed one and a false one. So that just increases the likelihood of convicting an innocent person. Eliminating the statute of limitations is too broad of a dragnet. Would you get that child molester that everybody's talking about and imagining? Maybe, but you're going to pull in so many other people. And I'd ask the same people who've testified here today, who've asked others to walk a mile in their shoes. I'd love for them to get together with Mr. Martin or Mr. Franklin or Mr. Tooley. Any of those individuals. Mr. Goodbread he spent 25 years in a Texas prison, and he finally got released a couple of months ago. Walk a mile in their shoes. What we want are reliable verdicts where you're sifting out the right guy from the wrong one. And I think this just really invites a great deal of mischief, not simply blackmail or the person who suddenly is cut out of the will and now suddenly remembers that Daddy did something 40 years ago. Setting those folks aside, I'm worried about the person whose memory is distorted and they themselves actually believe it, and we've seen those cases and they do happen. One other thing I'd point out, that one of the people who were speaking, if I heard her correctly, she said that she couldn't get something prosecuted because somebody told her that evidence doesn't toll the statute of limitations, and that's wrong. If she went to the police department and said this happened and they believed her, they can go to the DA can file an indictment. That indictment itself tolls the statute of limitations, and it tolls it forever and ever and ever and a day. So that wasn't necessarily, if that's what she was told, I think she was misled. And I guess I should point out one other thing. There's a reason that you don't have a statute of limitations in murder or manslaughter, yet you do in every other offense. The reason is that when a person is killed, the person never becomes undead. It is a fact, immutable forever. So there is no changing that fact, unlike every other offense where a person's memory can turn a guilty person into an innocent one or an innocent one into a guilty one. Completely different set of circumstances. That's all I have.
Ms. Hampton, let me ask you a question because I'm not an attorney, so there's a lot about the law that I really don't necessarily understand. let's say that this happened in 1979 to me, and I file a police report in 1981,
Okay.
2 years later, and I am accusing you of doing this. And let's say you are no longer in Texas, though, now, but you are in California. And so there's nothing that say to the prosecutor the police that you are now in California, but you kind of go back and forth, and you finally come back to Texas. I'm trying to figure out how does that tracking work, unless there was, usually when I filed this case against you in 1979, okay, maybe they had no clue where you were, but would there not possibly have been, and maybe I need to ask the prosecutor, a warrant issued for me?
I cannot imagine that the police department, who believed that I was a child molester who'd escaped the state and am existing someplace, would simply not seek a warrant for my arrest. And that warrant is all over the country, and the minute I got a traffic ticket or somebody identifies me or I go down to the DMV to renew my license, I'm going to be picked up, and then I'm going to be transported by bus in chains back to Texas to face prosecution. Happens all the time.
Well, even if this national and the big the police the big warrant deal that and I'll ask the prosecutor too that they can check. I mean, they can check even outside of Texas to see if there's an outstanding warrant or anything on me this way. So let's say even they did that and they couldn't match up the birthdays or something. Usually the information should kind of get you there to the same person. So then we have this guy, though, to come back into Texas, okay? And then he does another assault to someone. Do you not think that there would have been something once the person filed a police report saying I've been raped, and this person comes back into Texas, stands trial for a case, and we don't even have knowledge? See, that's...
I can't. It's inconceivable to me.
And that concerns me, that we would not have followed up, that when this old buddy boy came strolling back into Texas, that he would have had a warrant and been arrested, and you know what? Had that happened, the statute would not have run out.
Right. Imagining that there's an indictment, that after that police report, they filed that, it tolls and it tolls and it tolls. There's no problem with that. They're called the TCIC and NCIC are routinely run. They're run on witnesses, for heaven's sake. It's very easily to just run those things through, and only the most extremely negligent prosecutor or policeman wouldn't do that. And I've never seen it. I've never seen that happen.
Thank you, sir. Grace Davis to testify for the bill.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's late. And my name is Grace Davis. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Texas, and I'm the former executive director for the Council on Sex Offender Treatment. I've been an advocate, a therapist, a lobbyist, and a trainer in the area of sexual assault in Texas for 20 years. So I come to you today having been involved in this bill since 1987. As you may know, or if you don't know, the history of this bill, the first rape law written in Texas was in 1856. If you were a person of color, your punishment was always worse than a white man in Texas.
That's still also in 2005.
I think we're still there, but I also think that we have to look at, we have come a long way since 1856. Representative Deborah Danberg carried this bill 5 sessions before we got where we are today. For 5 sessions, survivors of sexual abuse across the state came before a committee like you and your esteemed members, and who are, I know they're thinking of us now.
Well, let me say this. We don't stop our work here just because we have a committee hearing. And let me tell you why. Because these two gentlemen here, they have bills too, like Representative
and other
Riddle.
committees.
So they're going to their committees to lay out their bills. And what you may not know, Representative Riddle also serves on the Criminal Jurisprudent Subcommittee,
yes, ma'am, I do.
and she's been missing too, having to lay out bills.
Right.
So we are very, very flexible.
Which is wonderful.
Okay.
At 9 o'clock at night, 9:20.
So I don't want you to think
no,
that
I know they're not. They're
playing.
just not here present. They're here listening, and I know that they are. Their offices are doing that too. But for 5 sessions, we fought to change this bill. In 1981, when the penal code was originally written, the statute of limitations in sexual assault was very small, and it moved up and down until 1997, when we finally achieved 10 years past the 18th birthday. As a clinician, I have sat in offices and watched and listened to survivors describe to me why they couldn't tell. As the director of the Council on Sex Offender Treatment, sex offenders in this state every day in sex offender treatment in a polygraph giving histories, their sexual histories, which they must pass as a condition of their treatment by polygraph, tell us of all of their survivors, many of them taking 10, 20, and 30 pages to write down survivors over the course of 20 years. In West Texas, in just one example, we have a group of 80-year-old sex offenders who've been molesting children and their families for decades and over generations. 1 in 10 juvenile sex offenders in our country is a female sex offender. We know women commit those crimes, and when they commit those crimes against men and children, we know the impact is just as traumatic as if it were a male offender. 1 in 3 girls by the age of 18 and 1 in 5 boys by the age of 18 in the state of Texas will be sexually abused. That is a fact, and it's an unfortunate one. The problem we have is when you are a child, and the fact that we are a state of 254 counties, we're a state where school districts don't allow us to talk about sexual abuse. You can't go into a school and educate children because it is perceived that your parents should teach you, the teacher should tell you something, you should read a book or hear it on TV, and it's not happening. In the times that I've taught children across this state, repeatedly children would come to me in every class and tell me they'd been sexually abused. My responsibility, as it is to every Texas citizen, is to report that. This bill allows for the criminal prosecution of those offenders who are committing crimes against children. For that incest offender who is not a pedophile, but there is a difference, they may stop their abuse, but the pedophile who is sexually attracted to children is going to continue to commit those crimes, and we must stop them. While we've talked about prosecution, I can tell you, and Mr. Hampton with the defense bar certainly has examples of those people who are released. I can give you examples of those offenders who are sitting in other parts of this state and in other states in this country who committed crimes against children where CPS was notified, where law enforcement was notified, and where we have 10 victims in Texas, 3 in Nebraska, an offender sitting in Nebraska today who I have made a personal mission in my life to watch when he releases, and we will have him in our Texas prison as soon as we can, because the statute did toll. Unfortunately, one of his 10 victims in Texas committed suicide because she couldn't deal with it anymore. Her statute had run. There was nowhere for her to go. What this bill allows for is the survivor whose parents have died, who they've been cared for by an uncle and an aunt. The aunt was physically abused. She was sexually abused and could never tell anyone because he was her caretaker until she became an adult and learned that it was okay to speak about it. The word is not out in Texas that sexual assault is not okay. Many of our children don't come forward out of fear, out of concern, out of lots of reasons. And so with this bill, we allow someone in their 30s to come forward because we say it is important. It is a crime. It doesn't matter your age. The DA will determine whether or not this case is prosecutable. And that's the most important thing. We haven't taken the ability of a district attorney to say, no, I'm not going to take it. Because in the cases that I can tell you, and you've heard many of them tonight, they're all similar, there were other children involved. And when the grandchildren, when the adult survivor, the aunt, was able to identify her niece and nephew being abused, her case coming forward and adding to their testimony would have added to the punishment of that offender, which is the end result, is to protect children and get offenders off the street. Parents aren't allowing some children to testify, and if you really have the chance to hear from some of these DAs who handle these cases, parents will say, my kid's not going to get involved, and they will pull them out of a case, and a DA across the state, DAs every day do this, drop the case. By allowing an unlimited statute of limitations, you are allowing that child to become an adult and defend themselves, and to present that case themselves when their parents didn't, wouldn't, or couldn't. And so I believe that House Bill 838 is something I've worked for 20 years in this state, to see that survivors are taken seriously and believed. They are given the chance to be heard in our system, which is the best in the country, because I believe that when a survivor has the chance to speak for themselves at any age, they have the chance to let our system judge whether or not this is a guilty person or not. So I hope that you and your colleagues will support this bill. I believe it's important, and I would like to see it come out of the subcommittee and go to the committee for a full vote.
Let me just say something, and I want to go back to the statement that you made as it related to Mr. Hampton's testimony. This is just my personal opinion. I don't think that the 3 cases that he cited and then the one that you mentioned, I think that's kind of to look at it both ways. Here is a person who really apparently was guilty, and he's somewhere away in a penitentiary right now. And he has apparently some additional cases and charges because you are waiting for him, I guess, you said, to come back to make sure he is in the Texas penitentiary, right? But that person is guilty. So I think what Mr. Hampton meant by what he said is the sooner we can get a case where we have good quality information on which to base the cases, the better off we are. And I think he sort of referred to a couple of things for us here in Texas, and it's unfortunate, but we've done a bit of this, and that is we have recently released sexual offenders, not because they were real sexual offenders, but because, and I'm going to say this, Mr. Rollins, of overly aggressive prosecution. We found those people guilty, and they went to prison, and they spent a great deal of time taken from their lives. And, in fact, they're only free. Those people that Mr. Hampton mentioned are only free, ma'am, because they were what? If you're innocent, you not guilty. Okay. The reality, though, is we have offenders that we have brought to the system that the parents didn't, that the system didn't. And with this bill, we will have those survivors have the chance to come forward. We don't want an innocent person in prison, but we also don't want guilty sex offenders walking around molesting children. So we have to find a balance. I believe this bill affords us the opportunity to have those offenders who are still molesting children to be seen, because in most of these cases you have littler kids that would come forward with the support of that adult too. So I think that it is a bill that helps us to do what we intend to do, which is protect children in Texas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. John Rollins from the Assistant District Attorney's Office in Dallas to testify for the bill.
Madam Chair and members, my name is John Rolliter. I'm an Assistant District Attorney for Dallas County, Texas. I work for Bill Hill, the Dallas County Criminal District Attorney. A colleague of mine was here earlier to testify in support of the bill, but I believe the Chair had a question about statute of limitations that I might be able to help you out with if you still wanted some more information.
Well, do you remember the question, Mr. Rolliter?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that you had a question as to how whether the statute of limitations is told after a victim reports a crime to the police and then the defendant leaves the state, re-enters the state, leaves the state, re-enters the state. Do I have the facts correct?
Well, not somewhat. Not even so much the statute of limitations. I think the statute of limitations ran out on this particular case because apparently either the police report was done, and I guess maybe the prosecutor's office didn't follow up, or I don't know. But my question was about the fact that in 1981, this lady apparently reported sexual abuse, and in 1983. No, it happened in 81, and she reported it in 83. And this gentleman was already incarcerated for an offense somewhere else. Now, not only was he incarcerated there, but once he completed that sentence, he also came back to Texas, and apparently he did some more sexual assault cases, and he eventually went to the Texas Penitentiary, where he is currently today. So my concern was, before the statute of limitations ran out, why was that case not dealt with?
Well, I mean, there can be a number of breakdowns in the system at various stages in a criminal prosecution, the investigation of a criminal case and the prosecution of a criminal case. And it is incumbent upon the officers involved to take the information that they receive from the victims and investigate it and transmit it on to the prosecutor's office, so that the prosecutor's office can then, seek any further investigation needed and then either indict the case or file a case of the information or dismiss the case if there's not anything there. But if the question's about criminal statute to limitation, it doesn't sound like it would have been told in the particular case. I can't speak to civil statutes of limitation very well if that's really the issue. But, it did key me in back there because there's kind of a controversial case out there regarding tolling in situations like this. We used to think that the mere fact that a defendant left the state would toll limitations all by itself, but that's not the case. Limitations wouldn't be tolled in a case like this unless my office indicted the case, which the indictment would toll limitations, as long as that indictment was pending, days, months, years, decades. Or if the defendant had been formally accused by the filing of a charge with my office by the filing agency, and then the defendant left the state, that combination of events would also toll the statute of limitations. I can't really speak as to how the facts in that case happened and why limitations was not told. But, if you need some more information about that, I'm always here to help you and the other members of the committee out with these particular legal issues, and we'd be glad to do that.
This lady filed her case with the police.
Yes, ma'am.
And based on what was testified here tonight, her case, in my opinion, never should have had to worry about the statute of limitations. I mean, she filed it in 81. I think it occurred in 81, and it was filed in 83. I'm sorry? Okay, well, let's say she filed it in 85. In 83, the man went to another state, and he was arrested for other things that he did wrong. And then he ended up coming back here to Texas and doing more things wrong. So he went to the penitentiary. But I guess within that time, there was nothing there that brought that arrest and her first formal complaint together with what the guy did to her that she reported to the police, and what he continued to do until her statute of limitations ran out, and I was just concerned about that.
Well, as I understand the law, the fact that a citizen files a complaint with the police agency is not sufficient to toll limitations. The law requires more than that. It requires an indictment or an information be filed in court to toll limitations period, or if the agency that she had reported it to had filed a charge with my office against that person, combined with him leaving the state, that would have been told. But it sounds like that didn't happen in her particular case, and that's, the change in the law that we're seeking here today would rectify that situation.
Well, it surely wouldn't make the police or the prosecutor's officer that didn't follow up on her complaint. It has nothing to do with how they perform their job.
No, ma'am, it does not. Ideally, the police would have, filed the charge with the prosecutor's office after investigating it, and we wouldn't be here talking about that particular case today.
And it may be, Mr. Roth, if we just lend it on out there forever, it may make somebody even slower to pursue the problem.
Ideally, Chairman Hodge, that would not happen because there are other protections that affect how quickly we can bring a prosecution. The defendant in a criminal case has both a right to a speedy trial under the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution. He also has a right under due process of law provisions of the Constitution to get into court sooner than that. So purposeful delay on the part of the police or the prosecution could weigh against us and lead to that prosecution being dismissed on other grounds.
Could you talk to me, though, a little bit, too, about allowing a child to testify? In a sexual assault case of a child, kind of walk me through that. What I would think would happen would be the child is messed with sexually. That is reported to a police. The police has work to do to investigate, and then let's say whatever they find is referred to the grand jury. But also in the meantime, usually, and maybe I'm confused, so help me out, Child Protective Services usually come into these cases somewhere. And these kids are usually interviewed by the Child Protective Services and someone from the police department, and usually this is done on videotape, where in most cases the children don't have to testify live in most cases. So it concerns me that if a child doesn't have to do that and they basically could enter the tape in as testimony, is that parents are don't want to pursue the charges with children, and we just say, I mean, it's okay.
Madam Chair, I have to confess I'm kind of lost. With regard to, I had my colleague up here earlier who actually prosecutes these cases at the trial level. I'm an appellate prosecutor. I assist her with legal matters and in the post-conviction litigation on these things. You've identified several different areas and sequences in which the case is handled, and you've identified a number of different procedural and evidentiary issues at trial. I'm having a hard time.
Let me see if I can make this a little simpler. A child who has been sexually abused.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the parent, now, I'm not talking about not reporting. Let's say if the parent never reports it, that's one animal. You don't even know about it. But a child who has been raped or sexually abused and the parents report that, then they can make the decision that they don't want to file charges or no charges are filed?
I don't believe that's really the case in my county. We try to take the considerations of the victim and the victim situation into account in our prosecutorial decisions. And the desires of a parent, custodian of a child, can sometimes be at odds with what we think is in the best interest of the child, what CPS might think is in the best interest of the child, and these things can get quite messy, where you have CPS involved in their oversight role of parenting and child care, and us involved in our prosecutorial role. But if the concern is that a parent could veto prosecution that we know about at that stage, and then the prosecution pop back up 18 years later, I would say that I think that's an unfounded concern. I don't believe that if we've detected it and know about it at the outset and have a viable prosecutable case at that point, that we could allow the child's parent to veto the prosecution at that point. And that wouldn't be good policy on our point. Criminal cases don't get better with age. They just don't. The longer it takes for us to learn about a case, investigate it, and prosecute it, the harder it's always going to be for us to prosecute these cases. So we would definitely fight any attempt by a parent to veto a prosecution and then pop it back up later on.
Thank you.
If I've understood your question correctly.
Right, you did.
Okay.
And I wasn't even concerned, there wasn't even an issue about it popping back up later. My concern was how could a parent, if a child has been raped or sexually abused in any way and it's been brought to the attention of the law enforcement authority, how can a parent just discount that? That was just, I just didn't understand that. But you've answered it for me, sir. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Do I have another question? No, sir.
Thank you very much. We do support House Bill 838 and ask that it be passed back to the full committee.
Thank you. Sharon Burns to testify for the bill. Is it? William Rusty Hubbard? Holly Hopkins. Is there anyone else here who wishes to testify on, for, or against House Bill 838? Then Representative Riddle to close.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hodge. I will attempt to be brief in closing. This has not been easy for me personally. I don't think it's been easy for any of us here. This is not a topic that is something that is pleasant to deal with. There are a few things, however, that were said that I would like to clarify. First of all, when Ruth Epstein with the ACLU said that they were concerned about faded memories, suppressed memories, and false memories, may I say I agree with that. I, too, have a concern regarding that. But the people that we had here tonight and the vast majority of the ones that we're talking about are not ones that are dealing with suppressed memories. Also, she said that if a child is told something over and over and over again, that they will begin to believe it. Well, in these cases, the children didn't tell. And statistically, the numbers that we have been given, 86% of children never tell. One of the things that Representative Escobar mentioned, I wanted to comment on, because for quite a while I was a volunteer with the Houston Area Women's Center, and I was what was called a PAV, and that was a personal advocate for the victim. And that's exactly what I did. I was an advocate for the rape victims. And whether they were children, and I had some that were very young, and I had some that went all the way up to 80. And every single last one felt that in some way it was their fault, that it was either the way they were dressing or the way they did this or did that, or they shouldn't have done this or done that. The fact is, I think that little girls should not dress provocatively, but there is no law against a little girl or a woman dressing provocatively. Do I agree with it? No. But is it against the law? No. But it is against the law to rape. And that we have to keep in mind. Also, sexual desire is not the reason for rape. Rape and sexual assault is not done out of sexual desire. There's a number of reasons why it's done, but it would make no sense out of sexual desire to sexually assault a child or even for that fact an 85-year-old woman. It has nothing to do with sexual desire. Also, false accusations. That, I think, is a concern for all of us that want our system to be fair and just. Nobody wants to see an innocent individual accused, much less convicted. But this particular bill does not do anything regarding causing people to falsely accuse or stop it. False accusations have been going on since the time of the Bible. If you remember, Joseph was falsely accused of rape by Potiphar's wife. That's going to go on regardless of this bill. That's been going on a long time. It's going to keep on going on a long time. But our judicial system, we have in place things that we hope through the process will limit or not have that occur. It was also mentioned about children being more knowledgeable today. And I agree with you. Kids are more savvy today in many respects. But in many respects, they don't communicate quite like we did. The world is different. But it's different in a different way, if I can sound redundant. We no longer have where we sit around the table and have family meals every night like we did when I was growing up. The children, for the most part, we've got a lot more latchkey kids and kids that do not have that open communication with their parents quite as much. And that would, I think, leave them considerably more vulnerable and less comfortable in dealing with it. And then finally, regarding the civil cases, well, this is not a civil bill. This has to do with a criminal bill. And I think that it was just stated by one of the district attorneys that this would not get into the civil part of it. Again, we have 226,000 children every year that are sexually assaulted and molested. And approximately 1/3 of the juvenile victims are children younger than 6 years old. I think that this is a bill that, as tough as it is, we've got to look at it, we've got to deal with it, and I would respectfully request that it be looked at favorably. If you have any other questions, I'm here for questions, and otherwise, Chairman, I close.
Thank you very much, Representative Riddle. It is the intent of the chair to leave House Bill 838 pending. Since I'm the only one, there are no objections, so House Bill 838 will be left pending. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to talk to me? No more bills, no more nothing? Then at 9:40, the Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence Procedure stands adjourned. For the call of the chair.